Good morning, fans of sports and basketball. We are excited. Our guest today is the author Chad Finn. We'll be discussing his new book, The Boston Globe Story of the Celtics, 1946 to the present, the inside stories and the acclaimed reporting of the NBA banner franchise. Chad, thank you for coming on our show.
Hey, James, thanks for having me on.
So, why does this book, or how does this book compare to last year's one about the Red Sox?
Very similar, different sports, but it's the same kind of concept. It's the a compilation of the Globe's coverage of the Celtics, just like it was with the Red Sox throughout their history. The Globe has been around for longer than both franchises. The Red Sox started in 1901, and the Globe had been in existence for about 45 years to that point. So they covered the Red Sox from day one. The Celtics have been around since 1946. And so when Walter Brown decided to have a professional basketball team in Boston, the Globe was ready to cover it. So very similar concept, just telling the story of these franchises through the Globe's writing.
That is awesome. So I can imagine since they were around an extra 40 something years, it was probably even more stuff to comb through for the last book.
Yeah, it was a little, I don't want to say better, but it gave me more options to use more stories per year because you're using you have to cover fewer years, obviously, 45 fewer years with the Celtics. You could use a couple of more stories for each year. The book has about 425 articles, so it breaks down to 8, 9 per season, probably about 8, because at the end of the book we have a very long chapter that I called retrospectives and anniversaries, which is stuff that is not part of a chronological timeline as we tell the story of the Celtics, but rather these great look back kind of stories. Like there's one about Larry Bird's 50th birthday and catching up with Bill Russell 10 years after he retired in 1979, things like that, where they're longer, thoughtful features that didn't actually happen, at the moment. They're kind of anniversary type of things. So um, probably didn't end up with, probably ended up with about 7 or 8 stories per year, I would say overall.
Obviously, people were excited about the Celtics one, but of course, when you do have success, they always want to know what the next one is. Is it the Bruins? Is it the Patriots?
It's funny, we that actually came up with one of my editors yesterday, and the book just launched on Tuesday, so it's out in the world on as we talk. It's day 2 now, so to get through the gauntlet here of the book appearances and podcasts and radio appearances and things like that, and but they've been pretty enthusiastic about pre-sale, like on Amazon and things like that. And so the conversation came up, would we do Patriots or Bruins next? If we did do that, I think they probably are leaning toward the Bruins. I think I'd prefer to do the Patriots if they ask me to do it. I think people at this point in time with them, with the team really struggling and probably in at least a couple of years here of not being competing for anything really meaningful other than trying to build up their roster, that people uh, are probably a little bit nostalgic already for the Brady Belichick era. And beyond that, a lot of interesting things happened in Patriots history before those guys were here. They weren't winning Super Bowls or anything, but it was a kind of a wild franchise. So I would be interested in doing that if they decide to do another book for sure. I'd do the Bruins too happily, but I think the Patriots would be more fun to do next.
Yeah, I was gonna say either way, you can't go wrong. I mean, gosh, the history that you've had there in Boston, and then of course, fortunately, you've had such a great newspaper all those years covering it, the Boston Globe. I mean, it don't get much better than that.
No, I mean that it was the hardest thing in the book, James, was the Larry Bird new Big Three '80s chapter, original Big Three '80s chapter is the longest in the book by far. It's almost twice as long as any other chapter. It's probably 70 something articles in the end. It was over 100 at one point. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One's pretty obvious. It was just an incredible time for Boston basketball. Larry Bird is probably the most beloved Celtics player of all time. Bill Russell certainly has a case, but Larry Bird is cherished here in Boston, and people are very nostalgic for that era. People my age in their 50s remember that vividly. The other aspect was the writing was incredible because the Globe at that point in time had Bob Ryan covering the Celtics, Dan Shaughnessy, who left during the '86 season to go cover the Red Sox, but he was one of the guys. Jackie McMullen came along a little bit later in the '80s. Lee Montville was probably the best writer, pure columnist writer the Globe has ever had, and they were all covering the Celtics at the same time during those championship runs, and so the hard thing was figuring out which of their stories to use. A lot of times I just copped out and used both of them, but a lot of times it was picking between two brilliant stories to tell, on one particular subject.
Yeah, I was going to say, fortunately, ESPN took away the thing that you all were, well, not took away, but shared with the world the thing that you all had in spades, those great reporters. Because fortunately, because of the different shows on the network, I've heard all those names and know how
Yeah.
great and knowledgeable they are. But if not, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have the pleasure of knowing, the Bob Ryans in the world and the Dan Shaughnessy's.
Yeah, that's kind of how the media has changed. When I was growing up, I always wanted to work at the Globe, especially when I realized I wasn't getting much past, Babe Ruth League baseball or high school basketball in my playing career. Um, and it was sort of my dream to work there, but it was the destination. It was where people went and finished their career. And you worked at the Boston Globe, and that was the pinnacle. And it still feels that way in a lot of regards. I mean, I don't want another job. I love working here, but when ESPN came around and started hiring actual journalists and doing this, had the sports reporters for a long time, and now, like Around the Horn came around about 20 years ago. PTI shows like that. ESPN became the next level, and they also used to. They don't do it so much anymore, but they were journalism operation on their website, and they were hiring writers, and that was sort of got more eyes on your writing than being at a newspaper would. So the industry's obviously changed, but back in the heyday, in the '80s heyday, early '90s heyday of the Globe, it was a place people didn't leave.
So, what should our fans know about? And we're not asking you to give away the book, but the time period between that inaugural season and Bill Russell in '56.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, that's one of the eras I didn't know that much about. I'd put the '70s in that category too, just because they won two championships in the '70s, and they tend to get overlooked a little bit because you had the '60s Russell dynasty, and then the big three with Bird in the '80s, and those kind of overshadowed what they did in the '70s. So felt like I learned a lot about that. And the other one was the very beginnings, just how the Celtics came to be, how Red Auerbach came here. A big one, it was kind of funny, was how Celtics fans know this, but Red had no interest in Bob Cousy. He did not want him. He called him the local yokel from Holy Cross College out in Worcester here, and ended up with him in a dispersal draft, kind of against his will. And, he ends up being the first great playmaking guard in NBA history and the first great Celtic. And, when Russell comes along, they're unstoppable. And so learning about how all that unfolded, and the Globe covered it very thoroughly at the time, was a learning experience for me.
Thing I always find funny is they when people arguing about who the greatest is, they talk about Jordan 6, which like Shaq, for example, which shoot, I respect Shaq, he's very knowledgeable, but like that's sometimes all he'll say is like, well, he's got 6, so he's the great. Like, then doesn't that mean Russell's the greatest because
Right. Right. I mean, that's the argument for Russell. We all know it was a smaller league then, and certainly uh, probably less competitive, just in terms of the NBA has exploded in popularity after Magic and Bird came around 1979, and what they brought to the league on opposite coasts, and having captured the biggest television audience for a college basketball game ever with the Michigan State Indiana State championship game. That changed the league. So I think you have to look at, certainly the more modern players are probably the better players. But Bill Russell was 21-0 in game sevens in his life, 11 championships in 13 seasons. A record like that is that's a pretty good backing argument if you want to make the case that nobody was ever a bigger winner in professional sports than Bill Russell was.
Yeah, because like if they want to just say Jordan's better because he's better or because of other aspects of his game, I get that. But a lot of times they come down to just saying the rings, and then in that case, yeah, then it goes to Russ, like you said. I mean, gosh, 21-0 in game sevens. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
No, it's pretty hard to do. And you going up against Wilt Chamberlain, who is as physically talented as any player the world had seen to that point. You look at Wilt Chamberlain back then, and you say, yeah, that guy could probably play in the NBA nowadays.
Yeah.
And you don't say that a lot. You probably don't. You wouldn't say that about Bill Russell. Now you always have to grade players on the era that they played in, on the opportunities they had, the scale of the game when they played. But Bill Russell certainly in his era was somebody who just did not lose when the stakes were highest.
So you mentioned Chamberlain. Is that his greatest rival, or does he have a do the Celtics have a bigger rival? Would
No,
it be Magic? Would it be, who would be the biggest rival?
yeah, I think it's individually. I think it's probably still Magic Bird because Magic won 5 titles. Bird won 3. And so there was some back and forth there. There was some suspense. Whereas with Wilt and Russell won. Wilt had the statistics, but Russell won. And, I think it was the last championship in '69. Well, Russell was in Wilt's head so much that, Wilt was out of the game at the end and didn't come back in, which can you imagine what the talk shows would say about that nowadays if a superstar player just said, nah, I'm good, or his coach didn't want to put him back in at the end of a game 7 of the finals. Russell, that was just so lopsided, and that the individual rivalry, I think, between Magic and Bird was a little bit more compelling. But in terms of team, it's the Lakers. Yeah, this is a great rivalry with the Sixers, especially in the early '80s, and there have been others along the way. But the long history over generations, decades, different phases of championship teams, even the late first part of this century with Paul Pierce and Kobe Bryant with the Lakers, and Celtics winning 1, Lakers winning in 2010 against the Celtics. Just the overall history of those two franchises is unmatched.
This is more of an internal player or coach. Who is the most hated player or coach? Is it like Patino? I would think Patino because I kind of feel he ruined things.
Yeah, I think it's got to be Patino, right? He came in with all these promises, took away Red Auerbach's team president title for himself, made it pretty clear that the Boston Celtics were his operation now, and then just failed. He had no patience. Didn't really seem to have. He shouldn't have had personnel power because his judgment on players that he was familiar with from his college days tended to overshadow what guys actually did in the NBA. Clearing off a bunch of players from the roster, including Rick Fox, who went on to have a really successful. He was a good player with the Celtics, and was a championship level player with the Lakers. David Wesley, clearing them out to bring in guys like Travis Knight, and there's always a bunch of Kentucky guys here, and his ego just got in the way of his coaching ability. Another thing was his approach to coaching wasn't going to hold up in the NBA, where it's pressure over 82 games. You can't do that with a team. The high point of Patino's tenure was his first game when they beat the champion Bulls, and you felt like, all right, this is headed in the right direction, and really never got any traction after that.
So, was there truly something special or unique about the parquet floor?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's parquet, first of all, right? But it was certainly a home court advantage, literally, because it had dead spots on it. And, Celtics players, Dennis Johnson is one who's always cited as having a really good read on where the dead spots were on the floor. And, it might be urban legend, who knows? But people always said that DJ would set guys up in a game, that he would push them to a certain point on the court, knowing where a dead spot was. And then, when the game's at stake or when they need a big play, he would pick the guy who'd dribble the ball, and the ball wouldn't come back up to him. DJ would get a steal. So I think probably the parquet floor was as big a home court advantage as any team has ever had, literally, for the court that they're playing on.
Nice. And then that last championship, where does that rank among the 18? Is it kind of in the middle? Is it in the, I mean, where's it rank?
That's a great question. I put it pretty close, not at the top. It's 86 to me. Is at the top as the most dominant team I've ever seen, even with the Bulls teams or Steph Curry's Golden State teams with Durant. That was the best basketball team I've ever seen when Bill Walton was healthy. I think 24 is going to be regarded as probably a top five, though, when you have a little bit more time and space to really judge it, because they were dominant statistically, offensively, and defensively. They won like 3 games by over 50 points. They won a bunch of games by 20. They just dominated all year. And there was skepticism about them because they hadn't won a title yet. But they breezed through the playoffs more or less, had some breaks along the way, like you always needed. Halliburton getting hurt in the Indiana series certainly helped out, and things like that. But that team statistically was dominant. It played a very team-oriented brand of basketball, with Drew Holiday and Derek White, as the guys that did every little thing that you needed them to do, with Tatum and Brown being the primary scorers, and just really, really dominated from beginning to end. And, if they replicate that to any degree this year, I think it's actually going to enhance what happened in 24, where people realize, oh, this is not just a one-year wonder. This was a dominant team.
Excellent. I was going to say, you read my mind. That was the next question. What do you think about this year's odds? And it sounds like you're very optimistic.
Yeah. So, I mean, you got to stay healthy. They're without Porzingis for a couple of months here, probably, although he's around all the time and getting his work in. But, Drew Holiday will be 35 this year. You wonder if, some guys who sacrificed last year may want a little bit more for themselves. That's kind of human nature. Tends to happen sometimes on championship teams. I don't happen to think that's going to be the case here, because there are guys on this roster who just their instinct is to play selflessly. And Tatum and Brown, have recognized what it takes to win a championship. They're not going to be out there trying to score 30 points every night. They're going to be trying to win another title. And if they stay healthy and get a couple of the breaks that you have to win a championship along the way, I don't see why they can't do it again.
Well, Chad, it has been a pleasure having you on the show, talking up Boston Globe, story of the Celtics. Gosh, I mean, that is going to be remarkable with the season coming up, to get fans, that think they know everything about it. But looking back, I'm sure we'll find, even the hardened fans will find something new, something exciting about the Celtics.
I sure hope so. Yeah, that's part of the fun in the book, is finding out things you didn't know or remember differently, that maybe history clears up a little bit.
Exactly. Well, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks, James. Appreciate you having me.